Quote, the purpose of insisting that implied fundamental rights have roots in the history and tradition of our people is to ensure that when unelected judges strike down democratically enacted laws, they do so based on something more than their own beliefs, Roberts said. Essentially to say that it is not like catastrophizing, it is not a so-called slippery slope, that the right to privacy precedent that the overturn of Roe v. Wade might set could very well lead to a variety of other civil rights being undone. It's kind of a big problem, and if you actually enjoy equality and people prospering in society and not inflicting suffering and pain on people for literally no reason at all, you'd probably be really worried about this. So unless you haven't really been paying attention to much of anything at all going on in the country, it's been a lot going on. Things are not looking too great right now. Actually, things are looking quite bad, and that's unfortunate for a lot of people, even the people that are ostensibly in favor of the really bad stuff that's going on. So recently, you've probably heard of this, the Supreme Court had a draft opinion leaked, this was some time ago, this was May 3rd, I think, from Justice Alito about the overturn of Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade being the Supreme Court decision on the basis of a right to privacy that federally made abortion bans not good, not very nice. You get in trouble federally for doing that at a state level. The overturn of Roe v. Wade would then leave the decision up to the states, meaning that essentially every single red state in the union would eventually pass a variety of abortion bans. Many of these states have so-called trigger laws that if Roe v. Wade was ever overturned would go into effect virtually immediately. Like, this is a thing that they've been planning for a long time. Now, that's a problem, because contrary to popular belief, women exist in red states, and people in general who can give birth exist in red states. And the lack of access to abortion doesn't mean abortions happen less, it just means abortions happen less safely. If it's the same for like prohibition of any kind of drug. If it's legalized, taxed, and regulated, then you get it through the proper channels and you know what you're getting. If there's a dispute, you settle it in court instead of on the streets and yada, yada, yada. Same for abortion, except if it's going to be criminalized and people are going to have it happen anyway, then the people who are pregnant will suffer immensely. Stats show so-called back alley abortions not very good for the health of the mother. In fact, a lot of the times these things can kill the mother, which would then in turn kill the kid anyway. It's almost like you're working against your best interests as a right-winger if you support this decision. But that's not new to anybody, because conservatives and right-wingers in this country, especially if not the world over, are completely fucking insane. They're irrational. They have not actually thought about the opinions that they hold. They've just been indoctrinated since they were kids by their parents, by the religious institutions that they are a part of. Big problem. Not good. Not very nice. And the Supreme Court ruling on the basis of the right to privacy could have potential ramifications for a variety of people that aren't women or even people that are worried about getting pregnant to begin with. However, I wanted to bring this in a bit of a different direction because I saw a tweet thread that was incredibly interesting to me. So here is Diane E. Anderson on Twitter talking about how in World War II, or around World War II, there's a lot of book burnings happening by the really bad side of the fence, the Nazis. So this is interesting to me because I've heard about this recently, as much as some years ago, but I never learned it in school. And I figure you might be in the same boat, so why not learn together? So this is a really interesting thread on the topic. On this day, so this was yesterday at time of recording, this is on May 10th. On this day, 89 years ago, the German Student Association, in collaboration with Goebbels, began a 5-day quote-unquote cleanse of libraries, bookstores, and institutions of anything deemed not conducive to the character of the German Volk. They started with the Institute of Sexual Knowledge. So obviously on the right in this country, for whatever reason, they have completely twisted the idea of George Orwell's 1984, George Orwell's Animal Farm, Animal Crossing, Animal Crackers. But they're talking about book burnings a lot of the time. They're talking about so-called rewriting history. I've talked a lot on this channel about how that's all projection, as it always is, because the right, they want to whitewash history, they whitewash the civil rights movement, they whitewash slavery. Like they've been the ones doing book burnings and rewriting history since the dawn of time, essentially. And this is just an extension of that. The first books that were burned, we'll come to learn, might shock you. The Institute was founded by Magnus Hirschfeld, a Jewish gay man who began studying looking into the lives of queer people after several gay men in his care committed suicide. He realized that there must have been something going on beyond what society deemed deviance. His work eventually turned into the Institute for Sexual Knowledge. The Institute became a repository archive for documenting LGBT people in culture across Europe. They also advocated for LGBT as a natural variance in humans and therefore good, because it is. And being homosexual or whatever else is also not just a natural variance in humans, it's also a natural variance in other animals that aren't human. Homosexuality and even transing they gender, transing they sex even, is very common in a variety of animal species as well. But, appeals to nature and all that. The Institute was also medical, serving patients in a way that allowed them to be themselves. The first transition surgeries were performed there, including the first neo-vagina, POG, on a trans woman, Dora Richter. Dora was born in 1891 on a farm on the Czech-German border. In 1931, Dr. Erwin Gorbant, I don't know how to pronounce German names, sorry, performed the first known vaginoplasty on her. Just 2 years later, she disappeared during the sacking of the institute. It is presumed she was killed in the raid. Some 20,000 books and archived material were destroyed in the raid because Hirschfeld was both Jewish and gay. The institute was targeted as a threat to the German Volk, who of course are all upstanding cisgender and heterosexual people, which is a, funny tongue-in-cheek kind of poking at the fact that they weren't. Hirschfeld himself was out of the country when the raid happened and ended up exiled in France, where he died in 1935 of a medical issue. Nazis a small mercy. Patient records from the institute were subsequently used by the Nazis to expose and arrest LGBT people. The LGBT community lost decades of research and studies into our community by our community. Records of early advances in our medical care were destroyed. Documentation that existed was deliberately burned by the Nazis. Our community has always existed. Our existence has just been violently erased. It is not fear-mongering or exaggeration to worry about similar efforts to censor knowledge of who we are in the here and now, because we know the consequences of our erasure. I talk about this because it is important to remember that we have always been here. We've just been violently erased. This is why I insist on telling my own story, because each story is the preservation of memory of who we are. The reason many think trans people are a new thing is not solely because of ignorance. It is because we have been violently removed in silence, unable to tell our own stories. And this is the common thread. So the common analogy for this is like left-handedness. How for a long time in this country, being left-handed was seen as like deviant and devilish or whatever. And in a lot of like religious institutions and whatnot, if you were seen writing with your left hand, you would get fucking beat for that shit. And they try to make it so that you weren't left-handed anymore. So the amount of people that reported as left-handed in a famous study was really low. And then eventually those practices stopped happening, and then the reports of people who are left-handed go up, and then eventually plateau to where they have always been. It's just that when they were being repressed, they were a lot lower. When you stop the repression, it levels out into a plateau because it's not some fad. People aren't going to be left-handed and literally make writing from left to right as people do in English harder. They're just doing it because that's how they do it. It is what it is. It's the same thing for trans people. But it's always been the case that the so-called, transing, it's just a new thing, it's the new trend or whatever. Oh my God, like there are so few trans people and now there are so many in such a short amount of time. How can you explain this? Blah, 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 blah. That's always been a statement of intent, not a statement of fact. It's not factual that there's only this many trans people and now all of a sudden there's a whole bunch, because they've always been there. It's just a variety of right-wing action and advocacy and legislation has been put in place to make people stay in the closet. That's kind of the point, because the right wing finds these people to be degenerate or deviant or whatever. They want there to be less people reporting that they are trans or gay or whatever else because of the things that they do. The fights against gay marriage, the social ramifications of being gay, making it harder for people to come out, the threats of violence or houselessness, especially as a youth, because often parents who are homophobic, transphobic, or whatever will literally do child abuse against their LGBT kids. They're really sad. All of these things happen to facilitate that low percentage of trans or queer people reporting. The fact of the matter is they've always been there. Now we have progressed in society to the point where people are more comfortable with coming out and expressing themselves as who they are and responding, yes, I am trans or whatever, on these surveys. That's it. So, the reason why it's interesting to bring this up is kind of to tie into this whole Supreme Court decision about the overturn of Roe v. Wade. Because the unfortunate consequence of this, because of it being founded on the so-called right to privacy, there are potential implications beyond Roe v. Wade. So we'll get into that. But I bring a lot of this up because I've been talking about this for a long time. If you've been watching my channel for any amount of time, you'll know that. This video right here, Defend Trans People or the Right Comes For You Next, is me talking about what I've called, and this is just a working name really, the right-wing civil rights ladder dilemma. Essentially, the take is this. It is very clear to me, especially in the modern day, that the ultimate goal of the right wing in this country, either wittingly or unwittingly, the people in power, at the very least, want to achieve a patriarchal white supremacist society. White male supremacy is the goal of that. where every person who isn't a white male is subjugated underneath them, yada, yada, yada. The basic premises of the right-wing civil rights ladder dilemma is that because of how ladders work, if the rungs are there, you can climb up it to get to where you're trying to go. Seems like a lot of the time trans people are the canary in the coal mine, and this fact is only buttressed by this entire idea about some of the furthest right people that have ever existed. The Nazis literally started burning books, not about any kind of civil rights for black and brown people, not about anything as it pertains to women, but broadly sexual minorities and gender identity. And what's funny about that is that literally anybody can be in a sexual minority or a queer gender identity. Women can be. Black and brown people can be. Everybody can be this. Not everybody can be black and brown. Not everybody can be white, yada, yada, yada. But everybody can be those things. It affects all of them. So this is why this is very fucking important to me. But essentially the take is this. If they can solidify their gains legislatively in their anti-trans agenda, they can then use this ladder rung as a foothold to start repairing the rung that allowed them to oppress gay people. Then they can move on to attacking women, which they're doing as well. And then they can move on to attacking non-white people, and they can move on to attacking black people, and eventually make it all the way back. The only way that you can stop them from doing this is by destroying all of these rungs. You'll notice that they're all broken. They're not destroyed. They're still there. They can be repaired. The only way you can do that is through leftist policy prescriptions and reforms. This is the only way it can happen. Like all of the liberal reforms that we've seen, which I do support, though I don't think go far enough a lot of the time, allow for these to only be broken and not the complete dissolution of this ladder to begin with. But so like this is just a very simplified graphic that I came up with on the fly when I was talking about it in a previous stream. It's essentially a way for me to show you how intersectional analysis, when it comes to oppression and specifically the rights campaign to make everybody's lives harder and make everybody suffer for literally no reason, kind of works in tandem. It is a multi-pronged attack on literally anybody that they can in order to solidify their end goal. And this is just a very good way to show that. Moving on from this, it's actually shown in the text of the draft. So I wrote on Twitter when this came out, conservatives will always weaponize the oppression of marginalized groups against each other. Literally what we're talking about right now. An overturn of Roe v. Wade and Alito citing this debunked talking point about black demographics prove this. So we go into the actual text of the draft. Other amicus briefs present arguments about the motives of proponents of liberal access to abortion. They note that some such supporters have been motivated by a desire to suppress the size of the African American population. A highly disproportionate percentage of aborted fetuses are black. Essentially saying that, oh, one of the reasons why we have to be anti-abortion and undo this very popular Supreme Court ruling is because, well, there's a highly disproportionate percentage of aborted fetuses. This is a lie. This has been debunked many times. But this is what they do. They will pit black people against women generally, even though black women also get abortions. It's completely fucking irrational and stupid, but this is what they do. They want to make everybody underneath them that isn't a cis white man fight against each other instead of fighting against them. Very simple divide and conquer shit. To continue from this, I also wrote, also remember, conservatives are only anti-abortion because it facilitates control over women. Women forced to carry unwanted pregnancies to term are more likely to depend on the father, or whoever impregnated them. The right lost the fight to keep women as property. This is their attempt to regain lost ground. Because it used to be the case that women were considered the property of their fathers and husbands. That was the way the world worked in the past. Eventually, through progressive action, women began gaining more and more equality in society. Now, it's not perfect. We haven't achieved true equality for all genders, much less specifically women, but they did lose in that way. So they want to regain that. And they can't just be like, oh, we want to make it so that women are property now, so this is the law and this is what it's going to do. They can't do that because they know it's massively unpopular. So instead, they make conditions so bad for women that they have to depend on the people that impregnate them. And oftentimes, if it's an accident, well then shit, there you go. Also, oftentimes, if it's in the case of incest, rape, or both, a lot of the anti-abortion people, the pro-forced birth people on the right, don't make exceptions for that. The so-called reasonable position on abortion is to be anti-abortion except for in the cases of rape and incest, and a lot of these fucking ghouls on the right are also against that, saying that if you are raped even as a kid and you become pregnant, you should be forced to carry that to term, which is literally insane. Nobody supports this. Like, it's a bipartisan consensus on Roe v. Wade that overturning it isn't a thing they want. Like, even Republicans will say that they don't want to see Roe v. Wade overturned. It is literally just to appeal to a fractionally small demographic of very loud voting people like evangelical Christians that keep Republicans in power that this is happening. It's a big problem. But anyway, let's get into this shit. This is an NPR article. Could overturning Roe v. Wade have implications beyond abortion? And that's certainly bearing fruit because a lot of right-wing politicians have been expressing interest in attacking a variety of these decisions. The leak of a draft Supreme Court decision to end the nationwide right to abortion has sparked speculation, including by President Biden, that other landmark rulings could now be on shakier ground, including those that legalize same-sex marriage and birth control. Let's just get into each individual one. Griswold versus Connecticut from 1965. Because the right to privacy is not directly outlined in the United States Constitution, it took years to develop the legal theory that has become central to those types of cases today. Griswold versus Connecticut, which first established the right to use birth control, was a key part of that success. The Griswold case concerned a nearly century-old Connecticut law banning the use of all forms of contraception. The challenge, which focused on married couples, was brought by Estelle Griswold, the executive director of the Planned Parenthood League of Connecticut, after her arrest for opening a location in New Haven. In a 7-2 vote, the justices ruled that marital privacy is in fact protected against state bans on contraceptives, and helped establish the idea that privacy is a constitutional right, even though the Constitution does not explicitly guarantee it. Quote, would we allow the police to search the sacred precincts of marital bedrooms for telltale signs of the use of contraceptives? The very idea is repulsive to the notions of privacy surrounding the marriage relationship. By the way, this is supported by the so-called small government, government so small that it can fit in the fucking bedside drawer of your bedroom crowd. Wrote Justice William Douglas, we deal with a right of privacy older than the Bill of Rights, older than a political parties, older than our school system. Griswold has since become a major precedent, referenced later in opinions about abortion and same-sex marriage, all of which found that people have the right to be free from government intrusion when exercising fundamental rights. Those subsequent cases have leaned on the due process clause of the 14th Amendment, which, by the way, not very popular with the right wing, not very popular with Republicans or conservatives, which says that state governments cannot deprive people of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. The 14th Amendment has more or less been absolutely fucking shat on by the revelations of the NSA spying apparatus and a variety of other things, the Patriot Act, and the list goes on. All of these, by the way, supported by the right. In 2005, John Roberts, during a Supreme Court nomination hearing, said he agreed with the conclusions reached in Griswold and added, quote, it does not appear to me to be an area that is going to come before the court again. Well, foreshadowing is a literary device. By contrast, at her confirmation hearing in 2020, Amy Coney Barrett, the fucking cuckold herself, would not say whether she believed Griswold had been rightly or wrongly decided because its conclusions, quote, lie at the base of other cases still being litigated, she said. But she added that Griswold was very, 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 very unlikely to go anywhere. By the way, in all of these Supreme Court justices and their confirmation hearings, they seemingly contradicted themselves on Roe v. Wade and its potential overturn. So that's kind of cool. It's almost like the Supreme Court is just a bunch of unelected demigods that operate in an undemocratic fashion and legislate from the bench or something. Almost like the idea of an apolitical wing of the justice system can't actually exist if the people that appoint these judges and nominate these judges to the court are elected through political processes or something. Crazy, I know. Anyway, Lawrence versus Texas, 2003. One night in 1998, police were called to the home of John Lawrence, a gay man. Police entered his unlocked apartment, where an officer said he saw Lawrence having consensual sex with another man. Oh, good heavens, what a horror. Under a Texas anti-sodomy law that banned two people of the same sex from having sex with each other, Lawrence and his partner, Tyrone Garner, were arrested. In a 6-3 vote, the Supreme Court voted to strike down the Texas law, overturning a previous decision from 1986 that had reached the opposite conclusion. The 14th Amendment's due process clause was central to the overruling. Quote, the condemnation of homosexual conduct has been shaped by religious beliefs, conceptions of right and acceptable behavior, and respect for the traditional family. For many persons, these are not trivial concerns, but profound and deep convictions accepted as ethical and moral principles on which they aspire and which thus determine the course of their lives, wrote Justice Anthony Kennedy, who authored the majority opinion. Quote, these considerations do not answer the question before us, however. The issue is whether the majority may use the power of the state to enforce these views on the whole society through operation of the criminal law. The answer, the justices decided in Lawrence, was no. Wow, that's crazy. Among those dissenting was Justice Clarence Thomas, who called the Texas law, quote, uncommonly silly, but also said that he could find no, quote, general right of privacy in the Constitution. Absolute fucking loser, by the way. Justice Clarence Thomas, also likely to vote to overturn Roe v. Wade. Obergefell versus Hodges in 2015, recent modern history, okay? It legalized same-sex marriage nationwide, and Ohio Jim Obergefell had brought suit in order to be recognized as the surviving spouse of his deceased partner, John Arthur. The justices voted 5-4 to declare same-sex marriage a constitutional right, citing both the Due Process Clause and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment comes up a lot here. Right-wingers, not a big fan because they're all in favor of a authoritarian dictatorial regime, where their say goes and it doesn't matter if anybody gives a fuck about it. Well, the right to marry is fundamental as a matter of history and tradition, but rights come not from ancient sources alone. They rise too from a better informed understanding of how constitutional imperative define a liberty that remains urgent in our own era, wrote Kennedy, who joined the courts for liberals. The conservatives, led by Roberts, wrote that the court had taken the 14th Amendment too far. The liberals' interpretation of the Due Process Clause, essentially that it guarantees certain basic rights that are otherwise unaddressed by the Constitution, had crossed the line into, quote, converting personal preferences into constitutional mandates. Wow. Justice Alito had called on the historical record of abortion in his draft opinion to overturn Roe v. Wade. Roberts wrote in 2015 that a historical basis for same-sex marriage did not exist. Also, a historical basis for the abolition of slavery also didn't exist at the writing of the Constitution, so that's interesting. It's almost like this is a completely dubious fucking point that means nothing. Literally, time marches on. We learn more about shit, and the world changes around us in reference to the new information that we've gained. This idea of so-called historical precedent about all this shit doesn't fucking matter. I don't care, man. We live in the here and now. We fight for a future. We don't fucking linger in the past like these absolute fucking fossils do. There's no point in caring about this, but it's a very convenient way to be able to potentially foreshadow future decisions in regards to all of what we've been talking about here. Well, the purpose of insisting that implied fundamental rights have roots in the history and tradition of our people is to ensure that when unelected judges strike down democratically enacted laws, they do so based on something more than their own beliefs, Roberts said. Essentially to say that it is not like catastrophizing. It is not a so-called slippery slope that the right to privacy precedent that the overturn of Roe v. Wade might set could very well lead to a variety of other civil rights being undone. It's kind of a big problem, and if you actually enjoy equality and people prospering in society and not inflicting suffering and pain on people for literally no reason at all, you'd probably be really worried about this. And would you look at this? So this is from Pam Keith, Esquire. Missouri is joining Louisiana in making IUDs and Plan B illegal. This ain't about abortion. It's about legislating and controlling women based on warped religious beliefs. This is very true, by the way. The only reason the abortion fight is a thing to begin with is, one, to suppress people from having sex in general, because for whatever reason, right-wingers really don't like that idea. It's probably because they're all really fucking bad in bed, and they feel bad about that, so they want to make everybody else bad as well. I don't know why you would do this. I don't know why you would post your own L's and codify them into law. Kind of cringe. Plus, you fell off. Interestingly enough, this is referenced here. Anarcho Abbott, the authoritative source, says on Twitter, they're going to make abortion a felony. By the way, Mitch McConnell has stated that there could potentially be a future where they try to make abortion illegal at the federal level. So not necessarily outside of the realm of possibility. Some may say he's doing that to drum up votes and they don't actually mean it. I'm going to take them for what they say. And even if they don't actually mean it, putting protections to make it so that they can't do that is still a good thing anyway. So I don't care if they're just doing it and saying it and it's just words, because we should be putting protections in place to make it so that they can't do it, even if it is just a joke, just a meme, just a ruse, kind of important. They're going to investigate miscarriages as felonies too. You know what felons can't do in a lot of states? Vote. This is actually really true as well, and funnily enough, there's also precedent for this. So, back in the Nixon administration, you'll probably have heard of the war on drugs at some point. Cannabis legalization is kind of a popular thing and has been gaining in popularity for a long time. Maybe if you're a bit younger, you don't really know a lot about the whole reefer madness thing that happened, but there was a point in time in the world where the drug war was at its peak, and the Nixon administration and the Reagan administration had a very major part to play in this. Funnily enough about that, the criminalization of a variety of these drugs isn't actually based in any kind of moral or ethical opinion as it pertains to the use of drugs, much the same way that that's not the case for legalizing same-sex marriage, or the same case for legalizing a woman or anybody who can give birth's right to an abortion and reproductive health care. It's almost like it's not about any of that. So John Ehrlichman, a Nixon aide, actually admitted this. Quote, the Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, aka we knew we couldn't make it legal by law women are now property of their husbands and fathers again, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did, he concluded, according to Baum. He admitted. They literally admit it. The whole idea of making something a felony is that in many states, especially red states, felons lose their right to vote if convicted of a federal crime. Not only that, but under the 13th Amendment, you can also be used for slave labor if you're convicted of a federal crime as well. And because a lot of these seem to target with precision black and brown communities, it's almost like the 13th Amendment, which ostensibly abolished slavery, still allows for it, just only if you've been convicted of a federal crime so dubious as having a dime bag of weed on you. And it also makes it so that you can't vote. So what's really, really scary about that is that that could also be the case for any kind of federal ban on abortion if it does become a felony. If you are convicted of a felony, of a federal crime, you no longer can vote. And if you look at voting trends and demographics for women and anybody that can give birth, they seem to skew more Democrat, meaning that if those people can no longer vote, then Republicans have an easier time of winning. Because the only way Republicans can win is not on the veracity of their ideas, of the fact that their policies are popular, of they literally propose anything to help anybody ever, but rather they have to game the system through the Electoral College, through the Supreme Court, through gerrymandering, through a variety of voter suppression tactics to make it so that the fewest amount of people vote, because historically, the less people vote, the more likely a Republican is to win. It's almost like they very, 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 very well understand this and are weaponizing it to maintain power, even though their ideas are incredibly unpopular with the broader public. Because they have nothing. They don't have actual policy. They want to cut taxes for the rich. They want to make it so that corporations essentially rule the country and can do literally whatever they want. That's all they care about, Republicans. That's literally it. And anything else is literally just culture war bullshit that they drum up in order to get people who are easily duped and indoctrinated to vote for them. They have to get people to vote out of fear and disgust for the other rather than getting to vote for something that might actually make their lives better, because they don't have that. The unfortunate thing is that Democrats don't really do enough of that either. They don't have a lot of the policies, at least they don't fight for them well enough in order to get people to turn out to vote for them. So, speaking of news, this is from literally today, or technically tomorrow because now it's the 12th, because it's 12:20 a.m. News. 49-51 Senate fails to advance the Women's Health Protection Act, which would enshrine legal abortion nationwide ahead of the SCOTUS ruling. Democratic Senator Joe Manchin, the last senator to vote, sided with all 50 Republicans to block debate. The absolute fucking cuck. Joe Manchin should not have a moment's rest for the rest of his fucking life unless he turns around and actually votes in the interests of his fucking constituency and his broader party. If he's not gonna fall in line, he should never be allowed to fall asleep, because people should be peacefully protesting outside of his house until the day he fucking croaks. This is all that we can do. This is it. These people are fucking ghouls. They're demons. They don't give a shit about helping you. The Democratic Party, either wittingly or unwittingly, acts as controlled opposition for the right wing. They don't actually care about shit, because they're also oftentimes paid by the same people to win their races as the Republicans are. They're just usually the least bad option. Speaking of protesting outside of people's houses, this has also been happening when it comes to the Supreme Court justices. The energy is markedly more negative outside Kavanaugh's house. The anger has become much more palpable than outside any other justice's house. This has been happening for Justice Alito, etc., and I wholeheartedly approve. So long as people keep it peaceful, you should be allowed to exercise your First Amendment rights to try to get an address of grievances. These people should not be allowed to rest. These people should have literally the worst lives possible, peacefully, of course, by shouting outside of their houses and making it hard for them to sleep. If they're going to usurp the will of the people and the common consensus and popularity of Roe v. Wade in this fashion. There's no reason why, we can even make arguments about the so-called sanctity of the Supreme Court if they're literally going against broader consensus on the issue. There's no reason. Any43, which you should all follow, by the way, on Twitter and on YouTube and on Twitch, a big member of the community here, from a speech tonight outside Justice Alito's home. They were literally on the ground doing the damn thing, because they're in DC. Quote, we've seen the introduction of more than 238 LGBTQ bills, more than half of which target trans individuals. Cops in Tennessee busted down a trans Twitch streamer's door while she was streaming to take her into foster care. These kinds of actions should continue to happen. It's because it's a last resort. We tried to go through the legislative process, but unfortunately, because the right wing is able to game the system through the Electoral College, etc., and enact the whims of a very small minority of the country, we are now at the point where, what else can we do? Well, what else can we do? There's a lot of people that have been drumming up anti-electoral sentiment in the broader left wing of this country. This seems to be a fairly online take. I don't think a lot of people IRL, left-wing voters, are really feeling this way, but I feel the need to address it. So I wrote on Twitter, on the 4th of May. Completely undisagreeable take. Voting is the bare minimum political engagement, and if it's not difficult for you because of voter suppression, not being able to take off work, etc., you should do it along with the extra electoral action you should already be doing more often. Elections only roll around every so often. However, the building of dual power structures, the direct action, the militant advocacy, the volunteering, the unionizing, all of these efforts that you can do outside of the electoral system, you can do 365 days of the fucking year, right? The electoral part of that only happens every so often. And if it's not difficult for you to do, you should be voting for the least bad option because of the fact that at least Democrats are a little bit less bad. They are the lesser evil, literally for harm reduction. That's what that is. And you might say like, oh, well, harm reduction, that's not real. Because if you're voting for people that are going to do less harm, well, they're still doing harm. Well, first of all, semantically, it's still reduction of harm in that way. But also organizing on the ground in this way, and a lot of the people that advocate that people don't vote, but rather do organizing on the ground, is also harm reduction. If you're volunteering to unionize a workplace, this is a method of reducing the harm to the people who are exploited for their labor under whatever firm that they're working at. If you're volunteering to help the homeless, unless you can somehow get systemic change that decommodifies housing, you're going to be trying to work in soup kitchens or do advocacy or whatever else you can do to stem the bleeding to make it so that homeless people have at least a small amount of a better shot at escaping that very terrible situation. That is harm reduction. The building of dual power, setting up like community networks in order to, when politicians fail or when the government fails, you can then help each other in times of crisis, of natural disaster, or whatever it is literally harm reduction, because if the electoral efforts that lead to the politicians and the government fail, you then do harm reduction. You stop the bleeding as much as you can by doing that organizing on the ground. Literally doing the organizing that people will often advocate people do instead of voting is literally harm reduction. It's not a good argument. And it's also a thing you should be doing anyway. Some leftists on here seem to find it hard to distinguish this position from the liberal just vote and the correct position, which is vote and. So it is very true that a lot of libs are like, oh, well, you shouldn't be protesting outside of the Supreme Court Justice's house. We should be saving that for the midterms, or we should be saving that for the next general election. You just gotta vote harder, man. That's bullshit. That's liberalism. That's fucking coward-ass bitch cucklord behavior. We can't possibly vote any harder except for trying to get more people to vote that wouldn't previously. But why the fuck would people continue to vote for you if you don't do the shit that they want you to do to begin with? You could say like, oh, well, Republicans, they obstructed, they get in the way. I don't give a fuck, man. There's been a variety of times where Republican obstruction wasn't the problem. Roe v. Wade could have been codified into law several times under the Obama administration, and then it wasn't, even though he campaigned on that. There's a variety of things that could have been done that Democrats just didn't seem to have the will to do. It's bullshit. So like the Democratic Party should be crushing the Republican Party under its fucking boot, not because they have like the correct moral position or because they're my team or whatever, but because literally statistically studies have shown that a variety of the policies that the Democrats ostensibly support are more popular. Like the Democrats should be wielding power, but they hate it. They hate it. They hate wielding power. They don't like it. Nancy Pelosi recently said in the heat of all of this that, oh, she wants to see a strong Republican Party. No, the fuck you don't. Personally, I like it when the enemy is weak and broken and the will of the people actually gets put into legislation and codified into law. But that maybe I'm built differently. I don't know. But they're spineless. They're weak. They're bullshit. So, what can be done about this? Well, you need to continue to support the people that are on the ground doing the protesting, making the lives of these Supreme Court justices just a little bit more uncomfortable. There are a variety of orgs you could donate to. Planned Parenthood, of course, is a major one. You should also be doing a variety of other things outside of that. And not only that, but you should definitely vote for the least bad option in elections, especially down ballot. You vote for the least bad option, which is often just some milquetoast fucking mamby-pamby, cowardly cuckboy bitch Democrat, because they're going to be better than having a Republican in that position. You want to increase voter turnout because Democrats are more likely to win in that case. And if Democrats underdevelop, well, then we have to organize on the ground to make up for their lack of ability to wield power in any fucking way. There's a variety of things you could do, but this is already a really long segment, and I feel like I've rambled a lot, and I feel like it's been really, informationally dense. I'm doing this all improv, as I always do. I assembled all of these Infinity Stones live on stream, and now I'm just, improv going over all of it. So bear with me if it's a bit rambly, if it's a bit like a rant or whatever. I'm essentially doing the work of a video essay, but live, so give me some fucking slack. I'm going to send you instead to Beau of the Fifth Column. If you're, feeling powerless, if you're feeling hopeless, if you're feeling bad about everything that's going on and you don't feel like you can do anything about it, well, actually you can. So Beau the Fifth Column has put out a variety of videos on the topic. These are really good ones, and I'll link them to them in the description below. You should be subscribing to Beau the Fifth Column if you haven't already. He's very based. I'm pretty sure he's an anarchist, or at least a leftist, anti-capitalist. That's for certain. And his aesthetic doesn't give that idea. You know, he looks like them because he lives like them. He lives in the deep south in Florida, but like he's not the standard archetype. Anyway, so let's talk about community networking 101, a very good one. Let's talk about community networks and what you can do, another good one. And let's talk about civic engagement, Roe, and electoral politics, another good one, to go over all of this in a more concise and more comfy manner than me screaming at you into my microphone and webcam. Very, very good. You're organizing your workplace, unionizing, building these community networks, and all these kinds of things, in addition to electoral action, is the only way that we're going to be able to do any of this. And if like you're one of the types that think that, you know, some kind of violent revolution is the only way that we're going to make it happen, then in order to get the material conditions to where a left-wing revolution would even be able to occur, you would have to do a variety of these things anyway. So it's a good thing to do, right? Regardless of if you think you can reform your way to a system past capitalism, currently, if there was a violent overthrow of the government, it seems more likely that the far right is in a position to capitalize on that far better than the left. So be careful out there. Anyway, at this point, I'm rambling. You should watch these Beau videos. You should subscribe to him. He's been very good on a variety of topics. And, you know, if you can, and if you're one of the people that might be affected by a variety of these laws, and that's literally everybody, highly encourage you to do a variety of things that I've already said, but especially if you're the most at risk, like if you're trans, or if you're, you know, somebody who can give birth, a woman, or if you're any other oppressed minority that I've talked about today, potentially, unfortunately, uprooting your entire fucking life and moving to a safer blue state might be a better play. Obviously, that's completely inaccessible to a lot of people. You would imagine most people, but if that's something you can do, you might want to think about that as well. There's a variety of funds out there. I think the Campaign for Southern Equality, specifically in the South, which I talked to Keffels for, you can see that as well. I'll be a link to that somewhere. Her charity stream that raised over $200,000. Part of what they do is also grants for people to be able to escape the shithole red states that they are, unfortunately, through bad RNG born into, and then move to blue states that at least give them a better shot. This video's Connor Call-Out is Felipe. Thanks so much for winning the Connor Call-Out for a second time. Previous one being all the way back in October of 2021. Holy wow, crazy, been here a while, LOL. Really appreciate the continued support. If you would like to be the next Connor Call-Out, all you gotta do is follow me on Twitter, @ConnorCC, retweet my video links when they go live. Make sure to leave a like if you like, subscribe, put the notification bell on. I have been up on 4 hours of sleep, streaming for 7 hours, and now it's almost 3 a.m. and I forgot to do this until now. So I'm out of energy, but I hope you're not. I hope you have a good time. Bye.